My parents locked my sister away to protect our monster uncle. When I finally tried to speak out, my mom spread rumors and called me a liar. That was 6 years ago. Yesterday, they listened in court as the recordings they thought were destroyed played loud and clear. Growing up as the youngest child meant I was an expert at playing dumb, to always know what was going on, while pretending that I didn't. I was 12 and my sister, Kesha, was 15 when I heard her get punished for the first time. I was sitting in my bedroom, which was beside hers, when suddenly all her belongings were thrown to the floor. "You're an effing disgrace!" my mom yelled before walking out. I didn't want to bother her, so I just texted asking if she was okay. To my surprise, Kesha responded with a text begging me to come in, and when I did, my heart dropped, because the part of the bed she was sitting on was stained with red, and her arms were covered with fresh cuts. I ran to the bathroom to grab her tissue while she just kept crying. Mom found out. I never meant for her to know. I didn't know what to say, so I just stayed silent while applying pressure to her wounds. When I was done, she thanked me and asked if I could sleep in the bed with her. I agreed, not knowing that it would be one of the last times I ever saw her, because the next morning, I woke up to my dad hitting my sister with a black leather whip. "How dare you drag your little sister down with you?" he shouted before kicking me out of the room. I sat on the stairwell, listening to what sounded like my sister being in a torture chamber. Halfway through, my mom walked up the stairs towards me. I thought she would tell our dad to stop, or at least just give me a hug. But no, "Don't feel bad for her. Your sister deserves it," was all she said before ordering me to come downstairs and enjoy some homemade pancakes. When I got on the bus to school, I texted my sister asking if she was okay, but this time she didn't even open my message. So when school ended, I tried to go home as quickly as I could. But Kesha was nowhere to be found. And when I turned around, I was faced with my mom standing there with her arms folded. "Your sister needed serious help," she said, keeping her voice low. "So we sent her to a facility to help her get better." Well, back then, I was still young enough to believe that my parents had the best intentions, so I automatically believed her and went about my life as normal. And after 2 months, Kesha finally came home. I didn't even know how much I'd missed her until I saw her. I instantly ran over to hug her, and she just stood there tensed up with her eyes completely glossed over. She used to light up when she saw me, as if I was the best part of her day. But now, nothing. I swear I thought she was pranking me, but that's when I took a closer look. Her face had lost all its color, and she was extremely skinny. My dad led her up to her bedroom, and she went straight to sleep. Every night, I tried to push my ear against the thin wall to see if I could hear anything, but she was radio silent. After a week of this, I decided to come home with Trolley sour crawlers, her favorite. And when I walked into her room, I actually saw the corners of her lips turn to a smile. But the moment was ruined by my mom barging in. "You're not to talk to your sister," she yelled before grabbing the candy and slamming the door shut. She then dragged me downstairs to eat dinner. My head was spinning, and my mom was the one to break the silence. "Your sister has been diagnosed with violent and manipulative behaviors, so if you really care about her, you'll do what's best and leave her alone." I was skeptical, but after seeing how Kesha looked, I figured that it was probably the right thing to do. But like I said, I'm the youngest child, so I started noticing things no one else did. One night, when my mom caught me crying into my pillow, she was about to hit me, until Kesha walked in and said I was the one to make her cry. Through the wall, I heard the beating that was meant for me. Another time, I was sulking for the entire day because our hamster had died. And out of nowhere, my dad had one of his little tantrums. "You want to act all sad? Let me give you something to be sad about." He was in the midst of grabbing the black whip from the wall when Kesha came running down. I told her it was okay to be sad. "It's my fault," she exclaimed, and I'm sure you can imagine what happened next. This went on for months. Every emotion I showed, every mistake I made, Kesha somehow took the fall. I started to wonder why she'd become so violent and manipulative when all I ever saw was her protecting me. Then came the night everything clicked. I was looking for my old diary under my bed when I found Kesha's from before the facility. Most pages were torn out, but one entry remained, dated a week before Mom found her cuts. Mom caught Uncle Ray in my room again. Said if I tell anyone, she'll let him start visiting Millie, my name, instead. Maybe if I'm broken enough, they'll send me away and I can't tell anyone anyway. Suddenly, it all made sense. Why my sister was sent away. Why she wasn't allowed to talk to me. She was trying to protect me. She'd always been trying to protect me, from the very beginning. And the cuts on her arms weren't cries for help. They were her way of making herself broken enough to be sent away, to keep Uncle Ray away from me, to keep his visits from becoming my nightmare instead of hers. I sat there on my bedroom floor holding that diary entry, my hands shaking so bad I could barely read the words again. Uncle Ray. The name made my stomach turn. He was Mom's brother who came over for Sunday dinners sometimes, always bringing those gross butterscotch candies nobody liked. He had this weird laugh and his hugs lasted too long, but I never thought about why Kesha always found excuses to be somewhere else when he visited. I needed to talk to her, right now. But when I knocked on her door, she didn't answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I whispered through the crack that I found her diary, that I knew about Uncle Ray. The silence stretched so long I thought maybe she was asleep. Then I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, before the lock clicked. But she didn't open the door. Instead, I heard her slide down against it, and when I pressed my ear to the wood, I could hear her breathing, fast and panicked. I told her I was sorry, that I wanted to help. More silence. Then the sound of her getting up and walking away. A minute later, I heard the bathroom door slam shut. I sat outside her room for maybe an hour, waiting. Mom found me there when she came up to announce dinner. She asked what I was doing, and I made up some lie about dropping my earring. She stared at me for a long moment before telling me to wash up. At dinner, Kesha's chair was empty. Dad said she wasn't feeling well. Mom just nodded and passed the green beans. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Uncle Ray had been at our house. All the times Kesha had suddenly needed to go to her friend's house or had homework that couldn't wait. How she'd started wearing baggy hoodies even in summer. How she'd flinch when any adult man got got too close. How blind I'd been. The next morning at breakfast, my parents dropped the bomb. They said Uncle Ray was getting divorced and needed somewhere to stay for a while. He'd be moving into our guest room next week. My spoon clattered into my cereal bowl. I looked at where Kesha sat, and her face had gone completely white. Her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't hold her orange juice steady. Mom noticed, and her voice got sharp. She said Keisha needed to stop being so dramatic. That family helped family. Kesha opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. Then she just got up and left the table. Dad yelled after her about being disrespectful, but she was already gone. I found her in the bathroom, throwing up. I held her hair back while she heaved into the toilet, her whole body shaking. When she was done, she sat on the floor and pulled her knees to her chest. She looked so small. I wanted to say something comforting, but what could I say? That everything would be okay? We both knew that was a lie. Over the next few days, Kesha started having what my parents called her episodes. She'd be sitting at dinner and suddenly start hyperventilating, or she'd be watching TV and burst into tears for no reason. Once I found her in the kitchen at 3 a.m., all the knives laid out on the counter, just staring at them. Each time our parents would roll their eyes and mutter about manipulation tactics and attention-seeking behavior. I tried to tell Mrs. Chen, the guidance counselor at school. I went to her office during lunch and started explaining about Kesha and Uncle Ray and the facility. But she cut me off, saying my parents had already called. They'd warned her I might come in with stories about my sister. Apparently, Kesha had a history of making me lie for her. Mrs. Chen gave me this pitying look and said she understood how hard it was to have a sibling with mental health issues. I left her office feeling like I'd been punched. My parents had thought of everything. They'd built this wall around us, brick by brick, making sure nobody would believe us if we tried to tell the truth. That night, I woke up to find Kesha curled up on my bedroom floor. She'd brought her pillow and blanket, making a little nest by my closet. When I asked what she was doing, she just said she couldn't sleep alone, not with him coming. I told her she could sleep in my bed, but she shook her head. The floor was fine. She just needed to be here. This became our new normal. Every night, she'd sneak in after our parents went to bed. Every morning, she'd sneak out before they woke up. It worked for about a week. Then one morning, Mom caught her leaving my room. The screaming started immediately. How dare Kesha manipulate me like this? How dare she drag me into her delusions? Didn't she realize she was scaring me? That's when I noticed the new lock on my door, one that locked from the outside. Mom demonstrated how it worked, clicking it shut while I was still inside. She said it was for my own protection, to keep Kesha from bothering me at night. The sound of that lock clicking shut made my chest tight with panic. Uncle Ray moved in on a Tuesday. He brought 2 suitcases and that same creepy smile. At dinner, he sat next to me, his knee bumping mine under the table. Every time it happened, I saw Kesha's jaw clench. She didn't eat anything, just pushed food around her plate while watching him like a hawk watches a snake. The first time he offered to help with my homework, Kesha lost it. I was at the kitchen table struggling with algebra when he pulled up a chair. He'd barely said hello when we heard pounding from upstairs. Kesha was locked in her room, beating on the door so hard the whole house shook. Mom ran up, yelling about property damage. Dad followed with the whip. I wanted to scream that she was just trying to protect me, but Uncle Ray's hand was on my shoulder, heavy and warm, and I couldn't make words come out. The beating lasted longer than usual. When it finally stopped, the house was eerily quiet. Uncle Ray squeezed my shoulder and said something about teenage girls and their dramatics. His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. I excused myself to the bathroom and threw up, just like Kesha had. Things escalated fast after that. Uncle Ray was always finding reasons to be near me, helping with homework, watching TV together, offering to drive me places, and every time Kesha would have another episode. She broke a window trying to get out of her locked room. She screamed so loud the neighbors called to check if everything was okay. She refused to eat for 3 days straight. My parents' solution was more punishment, more isolation. They put bars on her windows, took away her phone, removed everything from her room she could use to hurt herself or break things. They turned her room into a cell, and still she fought. Still she raged every time Uncle Ray came near me. I started finding things hidden around the house, notes in my backpack telling me to never be alone with him, a whistle tucked into my pencil case, phone numbers for hotlines written on tiny pieces of paper and stuffed in my shoes. Even locked away, even struck down, she was still trying to protect me. Then I found the phone. It was an old flip phone, hidden inside a tampon box under the bathroom sink. When I opened it, there were dozens of audio files. I pressed play on one and heard Uncle Ray's voice, low and threatening, telling someone to be a good girl, telling them nobody would believe them anyway, telling them to think about their little sister. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. This was it. This was proof. I had to show someone, tell someone, do something. But when I came out of the bathroom, Mom was standing there. She held out her hand, and I knew she'd heard everything. I tried to run, but she grabbed my arm. She took the phone and smashed it against the wall. Pieces of plastic scattered across the floor. She said Kesha was getting worse, making fake recordings now, creating elaborate lies to support her delusions. Didn't I see how sick my sister was? How she needed help? I wanted to scream that Mom was the sick one, but I just stood there, watching her sweep up the broken pieces of our evidence. That night at dinner, they announced Kesha would be going back to the facility. A longer stay this time, maybe permanent. They'd found a good place that specialized in cases like hers. Uncle Ray nodded along, saying it was for the best. I couldn't eat. I just stared at my plate while they discussed my sister like she was a problem to be solved. I tried to call my grandma that night, snuck downstairs after everyone was asleep and dialed her number. But Mom appeared before she even answered. She took the phone and explained that I was having a hard time with Kesha's illness, that I'd been making up stories, just like my sister taught me. I could hear Grandma's concerned voice through the speaker, agreeing that it must be so difficult for them. The walls were closing in. Every avenue I tried was already blocked. Every person I might tell had already been warned about the crazy sisters who made up horrible lies about their loving family. We were trapped in this house with a monster, and nobody nobody would believe us. Kesha knew it too. I could see it in her eyes when they let her out for meals. The fight was draining out of her. She moved like a ghost, thin and pale and silent, but she still watched Uncle Ray, still positioned herself between him and me whenever she could, still made sure we were never alone together. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. I was doing homework in my room when I heard the lock click. Uncle Ray opened the door, saying Mom had asked him to check on me. My whole body went cold. I said I was fine, that I didn't need help, but he came in anyway, closing the door behind him. He sat on my bed, too close, and started talking about how hard this must be for me, how confused I must be, how Kesha had filled my head with lies. His hand touched my knee and I jerked away. He laughed, that creepy laugh, and said I was just like my sister. Too dramatic, too sensitive. That's when we heard it. Screaming from down the hall. Not regular screaming, but something primal and terrifying. Uncle Ray jumped up and ran out, and I followed. Kesha's door was open, and she was on the floor, blood pooling around her. She'd found something sharp, I never found out what, and she'd used it. Mom was on the phone with 911. Dad was trying to stop the bleeding. Uncle Ray stood in the doorway, and for the first time, he looked scared. I dropped to my knees beside Kesha, pressing my hands against the wounds just like I had that first night. She looked up at me and mouthed 2 words. Flash drive. The ambulance came fast. They loaded her onto a stretcher while my parents played the part of concerned family. I heard Mom telling the paramedics about Keisha's history of self-harm, her recent escalation, her manipulation tactics. But one of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, kept looking at Keisha strangely, like she recognized something in her face. While everyone was distracted, I ran outside. The old treehouse Dad built when we were little sat in the backyard, rotting and forgotten. I climbed up, splinters digging into my palms, and felt around in the dark. There, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, was a flash drive. I shoved it in my pocket just as Mom started calling my name. I climbed down and ran back, saying I'd needed air. She looked suspicious, but was too focused on following the ambulance to question it. We all piled into the car, Uncle Ray included, and drove to the hospital. They wouldn't let me see Kesha. Family only, they said, and apparently that meant just my parents. I sat in the waiting room with Uncle Ray while my parents talked to doctors. He kept trying to make conversation, but I stayed silent, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. Hours passed. Finally, a doctor came out and said Kesha was stable. She'd need to stay for observation, possibly be transferred to a psychiatric facility. My parents nodded like they'd expected this, like they'd planned it. Uncle Ray put his hand on my shoulder again, and this time I didn't have the energy to pull away. But then something unexpected happened. A different doctor appeared, asking to speak with my parents privately. They looked confused, but followed him. Uncle Ray and I were left alone in the waiting room, and I could feel his eyes on me. He started to say something, but I got up and walked to the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door and pulled out the flash drive. I needed to see what was on it, but I didn't have a computer, and my phone was at home. I stood there, holding this tiny piece of plastic that might save us, with no way to access it. When I came out, the waiting room was chaos. Police officers were talking to my parents. Mom was crying, saying there must be some mistake. Dad was red-faced, demanding to know what was going on. Uncle Ray was nowhere to be seen. A female officer approached me. She introduced herself as Officer Martinez and asked if I was Millie. When I nodded, she knelt down to my eye level. She said Kesha had told them some things, that they needed to investigate, that I might need to answer some questions. My parents tried to intervene, saying I was confused, that Kesha had filled my head with lies. But Officer Martinez held up her hand. She said Kesha had been very specific, that she'd documented things, that she'd been protecting me. Did I know anything about that? I felt the flash drive in my pocket. This was it, the moment everything could change. But looking at my parents' faces, twisted with rage and fear, I hesitated. They'd been so careful, so thorough. What if the police didn't believe me? What if they took the flash drive and it disappeared like the phone? That's when I saw her, the paramedic with the kind eyes. She was talking to another officer, gesturing animatedly. I heard her say something about mandatory reporting, about signs she'd recognized, about how she'd made sure to get Kesha alone during transport. My parents were getting louder, threatening lawsuits, demanding lawyers. They said Kesha was mentally ill, that she'd been diagnosed with manipulative, violent behaviors. They had paperwork from the facility to prove it. Officer Martinez looked uncertain. I made my decision. I walked up to Officer Martinez and pulled out the flash drive. I said Kesha hid this for me, that it had evidence, that Uncle Ray had been hurting her and my parents knew. The words tumbled out in a rush, years of silence breaking like a dam. My parents lunged for the flash drive, but the officers stepped between us. Mom was screaming that I was lying, that Kesha had brainwashed me. Dad was shouting about parental rights and false accusations. But Officer Martinez took the flash drive carefully, like it was made of gold. They took us all to the station, me in one car, my parents in another. I gave my statement in a small room with soft chairs and a box of tissues on the table. I told them everything. About the first night I found Kesha cutting, about the beatings, about Uncle Ray moving in, about the locks and the isolation and the way they'd convinced everyone we were crazy. The detective taking my statement was patient, letting me talk without interrupting. When I finished, she said they'd need to look at what was on the flash drive, that I'd done the right thing, that Kesha had been very brave, and so was I. I found out later what happened during that ambulance ride. Kesha had used her injury as a calculated risk. She knew they'd have to take her to the hospital, knew that during transport she'd be alone with medical professionals for the first time in months. The paramedic who'd recognized the signs of abuse had been trained in trauma response. She'd seen enough victims to know the look in Kesha's eyes. Keisha had told her everything during that ride, about Uncle Ray, about the cover-up, about the flash drive hidden in the treehouse. The paramedic had followed protocol, reporting to her supervisor, who contacted the police. By the time we reached the hospital, the investigation was already beginning. The flash drive contained everything. Photos of Kesha's injuries that she'd taken in secret, audio recordings of Uncle Ray's threats, and my parents' acknowledgement acknowledgement of what was happening. Medical records she'd somehow copied showing discrepancies between her actual injuries and what my parents reported. Even emails between my parents and the facility, discussing payment for intensive isolation therapy to break her resistance. Uncle Ray was arrested at a motel 2 towns over, trying to leave the state. My parents were charged with child endangerment and conspiracy. The facility was investigated and eventually shut down, and Kesha and I were placed with our grandmother, who cried when she learned what had been happening under her nose. Kesha spent a month in the hospital, then came to live with Grandma too. She was different, quieter, but the light slowly came back to her eyes. We shared a room by choice this time, and every night I'd hear her breathing and know we were safe. She started therapy, real therapy, not the kind designed to break her. Started eating again, started smiling when I brought her trolley sour crawlers. The trial was hard, testifying against our parents, seeing Uncle Ray in court, reliving everything for strangers. But Officer Martinez was there, and the kind paramedic, and our grandmother who held our hands and whispered that she believed us, had always believed us, would always believe us. They were all found guilty. Uncle Ray got the longest sentence. My parents got less time but lost all parental rights. Some family members took their side, said we'd destroyed the family with our lies, but others came forward with their own suspicions, things they'd noticed but dismissed, signs they'd ignored. Kesha graduated high school a year late but with honors. She went to college, became a social worker, dedicated her life to protecting kids like us. I followed a different path but carried the same purpose. We never forgot those nights in our childhood home, but we refused to let them define us. Sometimes I think about that first night, finding her with those cuts on her arms, how she'd hurt herself trying to become broken enough to be sent away, to keep Uncle Ray from moving on to me, how every beating she took, every punishment she endured, was her standing between me and a monster. She was 15 years old, carrying a burden that would break most adults, and she carried it alone for so long. But she wasn't alone in the end. The system that failed us at first eventually worked. Good people did their jobs. The truth, documented and preserved on a tiny flash drive, set us free. And Kesha's sacrifice, her strength, her refusal to let him touch me even at the cost of her own safety, saved us both. We still live with scars, inside and out. Trust comes hard. Loud voices make us flinch. Locked doors trigger panic. But we survived. We're free. And every night, in our own homes now, we can sleep knowing the monsters are locked away, and the locks only work from the inside. That's the thing about playing dumb, about being the youngest who notices everything. Sometimes you see too much. Sometimes the truth is worse than any nightmare. But sometimes, if you're lucky and brave and have a sister willing to sacrifice everything for you, sometimes the truth can save you too. The trial date got set for 6 months out. Grandma hired a lawyer who specialized in cases like ours, some woman named Patricia who wore pantsuits and had this way of making you feel like everything would be okay. She came to the house every week to prep us, going over our testimonies until I could recite mine in my sleep. Living with Grandma was weird at first. Her house smelled like lavender, and she kept trying to feed us constantly. Like if she could just get enough food in us, it would fix everything. Kesha barely ate anything those first few weeks. She'd push mashed potatoes around her plate while Grandma watched with worried eyes. School was rough. Word got out about why we were living with our grandmother. Some kids were cool about it, but others whispered in the hallways. I heard someone's mom say we were probably lying for attention. Another said no mother would ever cover up something like that. They didn't know about the flash drive yet. Kesha had to do senior year over again since she'd missed so much. She didn't complain, just showed up every day in Grandma's hand-me-down car. I'd see her in the hallway sometimes, keeping her head down, books clutched to her chest like armor. When guys got too close, she'd freeze up. When teachers raised their voices, she'd flinch. The prosecution lawyer, some guy named David, was building the case. He had the flash drive contents printed out in these massive binders. Photos, transcripts, medical records. Seeing it all laid out like that made it real in a way that living through it hadn't. This happened. We had proof. We weren't crazy. Uncle Ray's lawyer tried to get the evidence thrown out, said it was obtained illegally or something, but the judge shut that down fast. The recordings were clear. His voice talking about things that made the court reporter look sick. Mom's voice agreeing to keep quiet. Dad's voice threatening Kesha if she told anyone. My parents got separate lawyers. They tried to turn on each other, each claiming the other was the mastermind. Mom said Dad forced her to go along with it. Dad said Mom was the one who invited Ray to stay. Their lawyers must have told them to shut up because after that first week, they stopped talking to the media. Patricia had us do practice runs in her office. She'd pretend to be the defense lawyer, asking horrible questions. Why didn't we tell anyone sooner? Why did Kesha hurt herself if she wasn't actually mentally ill? How did we know the recordings weren't fake? Each question felt like being punched, but Patricia said it was better to be prepared. Kesha started going to therapy twice a week. Real therapy this time, with a woman who specialized in trauma. She'd come back exhausted, eyes red from crying. But slowly, something shifted. She started eating regular meals, started listening to music again. Even laughed once when I tripped over Grandma's cat. The defense tried to dig up dirt on us. They found out about my failed history test, tried to paint me as a liar who needed attention. They brought up every time Kesha had ever gotten in trouble at school, trying to prove she was violent and manipulative just like our parents said. But Patricia was ready for all of it. 3 months before trial, Kesha got accepted to community college. Just part-time, just a few classes, but it was something. She picked social work courses, said she wanted to help kids like us. Grandma cried happy tears and made a cake. It felt weird celebrating anything, but we did it anyway. More evidence kept surfacing. Other families who'd used that facility started coming forward. Turns out intensive isolation therapy was their specialty. Kids locked in rooms for days, medications forced on them to keep them quiet, parents paying extra for staff to look the other way. The whole place was rotten. Uncle Ray tried to make a plea deal. His lawyer contacted ours. hours, offering to plead guilty to lesser charges. Patricia laughed in their faces. She had him on those recordings, had photos Kesha had managed to take, had my testimony about that night he came to my room. He wasn't getting off easy. My parents kept trying to contact us. Letters showed up at Grandma's house, full of apologies and explanations, how they were just trying to protect the family, how they never meant for things to go so far, how they loved us and wanted us to come home. Grandma burned every single one in the fireplace. The trial finally started on a Monday in April. The courthouse was this big stone building that made me feel tiny. Reporters were outside, but Patricia hustled us through a side entrance. The courtroom smelled like old wood and fear. I sat between Grandma and Kesha, trying not to throw up. Opening statements were brutal. The prosecution laid out everything chronologically: the abuse, the cover-up, the facility, the recordings. David was methodical, building the case piece by piece. The defense tried to paint us as troubled girls who made up stories, said the recordings were taken out of context, said Kesha's self-harm proved she was unstable. When they played the first recording, Mom started crying. Not pretty tears, but ugly sobbing that made the judge call a recess. I wanted to feel bad for her, but all I could think about was Kesha locked in her room, trying to protect me while Mom knew exactly what was happening. Kesha testified first. She was amazing, calm, clear, detailed. She explained about Uncle Ray's visits, about how Mom threatened to let him visit me instead, about cutting herself hoping they'd send her away, about taking beatings meant for me. The defense lawyer tried to trip her up, but she never wavered. My turn came on day 3. My hands shook so bad I could barely take the oath, but then I looked at Kesha, and she gave me this tiny nod. I told them everything, finding her diary, the night in my room, the flash drive in the treehouse, how they'd convinced everyone we were lying before we even tried to tell. The defense lawyer asked why I didn't tell anyone sooner. I explained about Mrs. Chen, how my parents had called ahead. He asked why I believed Kesha over my parents. I said because Kesha bled for me, took beatings for me, gave up everything to keep me safe. Parents were supposed to protect you, not cover up for monsters. Uncle Ray took the stand in his own defense. Big mistake. He tried to claim everything was consensual, that Kesha had come on to him. The prosecution destroyed him with the recordings. His voice threatening a 15-year-old. His voice talking about visiting me next. By the end, even his own lawyer looked disgusted. Mom testified that she was scared of Dad, that he forced her to keep quiet, but the emails destroyed that story. Her messages to the facility, paying extra for isolation therapy. Her voice on the recordings, calm and cold, telling Ray to be more careful. Her Google searches about how to deal with troubled teens who make accusations. Dad tried to claim he didn't know what Ray was doing, said he thought Kesha was lying for attention, but there was a recording of him telling Ray to keep it quiet and promising to handle Kesha if she caused problems. His own words buried him. The facility director testified under immunity. He detailed their program, how parents paid premium prices for them to break down difficult children, how they used isolation, medication, and punishment to make kids compliant, how my parents specifically requested the harshest treatment to stop Kesha from talking. Character witnesses came next. Teachers who'd noticed changes in Kesha but were told she was going through a phase. Neighbors who heard screaming but believed my parents' stories about teenage tantrums. Friends' parents who thought something was off but didn't want to interfere. All of them saying they wished they'd done something. Patricia brought in experts to explain trauma responses, why Kesha hurt herself, why she didn't run away, why she protected me instead of saving herself. They talked about something called trauma bonding, about how abusers isolate victims, about how parents covering up abuse damages kids in ways that last forever. The medical examiner who looked at Kesha's records testified about inconsistencies, injuries that didn't match my parents' explanations, patterns that suggested repeated abuse over time, scars in places that would be hard to reach if you were hurting yourself, evidence that backed up everything on the flash drive. Closing arguments took a whole day. David walked the jury through everything step by step, the timeline, the evidence, the recordings. He played Uncle Ray's voice one more time, talking about visiting me next. He showed photos of Kesha's injuries. He read the emails about breaking her down. He made it impossible to ignore. The defense tried everything, said we were coached, said the recordings were edited, said Kesha was mentally ill and I was manipulated. But they had nothing to counter the evidence. No explanation for the recordings. No reason why parents would pay for torture disguised as therapy, unless they had something to hide. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of me pacing Grandma's living room. 2 days of Kesha staring at nothing. 2 days of waiting to see if anyone would believe us, really believe us, after all the lies our parents had spread. When the verdict came, we sat in the courtroom holding hands. Guilty on all counts for Uncle Ray. Guilty of child endangerment for Mom. Guilty of conspiracy for Dad. Guilty of failing to protect us. Guilty of covering up abuse. Guilty of paying to have Kesha tortured into silence. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Ray got 25 years. Mom got 12. Dad got 15. The facility director got 10. The place shut down. All the kids sent home or to real treatment centers. Other parents got investigated. Some kids finally got help. Others were too broken to save. After the trial, reporters wanted to talk to us. Patricia handled them while we went home with Grandma. Keisha slept for 16 hours straight. I sat by her bed, watching her breathe, finally understanding the weight she'd carried. She'd been Atlas holding up the sky, keeping it from crushing me. We stayed with Grandma permanently. She painted our rooms whatever colors we wanted. Bought Kesha a guitar when she mentioned wanting to learn. Let me get a dog even though she was allergic. She spent the rest of her life trying to make up for not seeing what was happening, even though we told her it wasn't her fault. Kesha did become a social worker. Took her 6 years to get through college because sometimes the trauma would knock her back. But she made it. She works with kids now, the ones nobody believes. She knows what to look for. She knows how to help. She saves them the way she saved me. I became a teacher. Elementary school, where maybe I can spot the signs early. Where I can be the adult who who notices, who asks the right questions, who doesn't accept easy explanations, where I can teach kids that secrets that hurt aren't meant to be kept. We don't talk to most of our extended family. They chose sides, and it wasn't ours. But we built a new family. Friends who became sisters. Mentors who became mothers. People who believed us from the start and never wavered. People who understood that family isn't blood, it's who shows up. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that lock on my door. Sometimes Kesha still flinches when someone moves too fast. We both go to therapy. We both take medication. We both have days where the weight of it all feels crushing, but we survived. We're here. We're free. The last time I saw my parents was at sentencing. They looked smaller somehow, older. They tried to catch my eye, maybe hoping for forgiveness, but I looked at Kesha instead, at the sister who bled for me, who took beatings meant for me, who sacrificed her childhood to save mine. That's what love looks like, not apologies after you get caught. Uncle Ray died in prison 5 years into his sentence. Another inmate, they said. We didn't go to the funeral, didn't mourn, just felt this weird emptiness, like when you finally throw out something rotten that's been stinking up your house. The smell lingers for a while, but eventually fresh air wins. Kesha got married last year. Small ceremony, just close friends and chosen family. She picked a good one, someone patient and kind who understands why she needs the lights on sometimes, why she triple checks locks, why she can't watch certain movies. He loves her anyway, maybe especially because of her strength. I'm in grad school now, studying child psychology. Want to understand more about how to help kids like us. My thesis is on sibling protection in abusive homes, how older siblings become shields, how they sacrifice themselves, how that trauma shapes both kids forever. Kesha reads my drafts, corrects my assumptions, shares what I missed. We text every day. Nothing major, just checking in. Stupid memes, complaints about work, pictures of my dog, normal sister stuff that we never got to have before. We're making up for lost time, building the relationship that was stolen from us. It's different than it would have been, but it's ours. Last week was the anniversary of the day she came home from the facility. We don't usually mark it, but this year felt different. We met for lunch, just the two of us. Sat there eating sandwiches and not talking about it, but both knowing, both remembering, both grateful we made it out. She brought me trolley sour crawlers for dessert, the tropical kind she knew I loved. We sat in her car eating them, lips puckering from the sour coating. For a minute, we were just sisters, not survivors or victims or any of those heavy words, just two girls sharing candy, like we should have been able to do all along. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't go away. It lives in your bones, shapes how you move through the world, but it doesn't have to define you. Keisha taught me that. She showed me how to be strong, how to protect others, how to document the truth, how to survive when the people who should protect you become the danger. We're okay now. Not perfect, not healed, but okay. We have bad days and good days and days where we forget for a while. We have lives and careers and people who love us right. We have each other, which is what got us through in the first place. Two sisters against the world, and the world didn't win. I still play dumb sometimes. Old habits die hard, but now I know when to speak up, when to show what I know, when to protect others the way Kesha protected me. The youngest child who sees everything, who finally learned when to tell.